Okay, I think we should start because everyone waiting is now with us. So good evening, everyone. I'm Chaim Brashid Jobner, and I'm speaking today on behalf of Jewish Network for Palestine. It's a very special evening that we have facing us. This is an evening to honor a book published by members of the Jewish Voice for Peace in New York. Jewish Network for Palestine is the younger sister of Jewish Voice for Peace. And we have been following them, and they have been following us very carefully since 2018, when we started operating in London. So we are the small and young sister between those two. And we learned a lot from JVP in New York and continue to do so. And the book we're talking about is this. You would recognize the phrase behind this, yeah? And today we have with us two of the authors in the book. There are 35 authors or 36, I don't remember. It's a book with many people contributing to it and contributing to the activities that the book has created, and you will hear that from both of the contributors. So before I introduce the speakers for tonight, I want to share with you a few announcements. First, if any of you is not muted, I would ask you to mute so there are no untoward interruptions to the speakers. And also to disconnect your video until the Q&A, if you please do so. Now, this event is being recorded and will be shared on the JNP website later tomorrow. To pose a question in the Q&A, put it in the chat directly addressed to the host and raise your electronic hand if connected by Zoom. Just wait to be asked. I trust that we shall not experience any intentional disruptions. But if we do, any such disruption will lead to an immediate expulsion from the webinar, obviously. And finally, I wish to thank the chair of JNP, David Cannon, who is the host for tonight, for dealing with the technical aspects behind the scenes.
You can argue about facts, but a story is a person with lived experience. And so we wanted to make sure that these stories were told.
I've been working on Palestine my whole life, but I'm hearing stories that I haven't heard yet, and I didn't know existed.
We have a lot of stories of Palestinians in the diaspora, the Ashkenazi Jews, Arab Jews, Palestinian Jews. We have several stories about experience of being gay, being trans, both Palestinian and Jews.
You see in the chat links to buy the books and also links to a longer presentation of over an hour. I very strongly suggest that those of you that are interested in the topic view that. I then want to introduce to you Professor Ros Peczewski. Now, Rosalind Peczewski is a distinguished professor emerita of political science at Hunter College and the Graduate Center, City University of New York, a widely published feminist scholar and recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship. Since 2013, she has been an active member of Jewish Voice for Peace in the US and part of the New York City chapter leadership team. Please take it from here, Rosalind.
Oh, thank you so much, Chaim. It's a great, great pleasure for me to be here with our sister organization, the Jewish Network for Palestine in the UK. This whole experience of working on this book, working with JVP in New York, has just been one of expanding further and further circles of our family, and our family being the movement for Palestine liberation that we all are committed to. Well, I want to say a little bit about how this book originated and evolved. You know, in JVP New York, we were very aware that Zionism is the ideology that underlines all of Jewish Israeli claims to hegemony over Palestinian lands and lives. But we had to unpack the history and consequences of this reality. And doing so was a journey. It started as a kind of study group within JVP New York. And then we actually produced a pamphlet, this pamphlet, Confronting Zionism, a little, 70-something page pamphlet with stories that were mainly of Jews, Ashkenazi and Sephardim Jews in both from the US and some who had grown up in Israel and became anti-Zionists. But that evolved into a marvelous theater piece called Wrestling with Zionism that my dear co-editor Esther Farmer created and directed, and Esther and Sarah Sills produced. And we performed that all over the New York metropolitan area, and it aroused a lot of interest. People were excited about it. They changed their thinking, and a lot of Palestinian friends came to the performance, were in the performance, and joined this project as storytellers, telling their own stories, because we realized it had to be much more diverse, and we needed our Palestinian partners. And that in turn evolved into the book that you see, A Land with a People, a collection of personal stories, art, history. And that project really has 4, I call them signposts. I don't know if that's the right word, but meaningful pillars: history, power, resistance, and relationships. History is, for me personally, it has a lot of personal meaning. I'm a political scientist, but my work relies always on trying to understand history. The history we studied early on in our study groups revealed to us a range of Zionist views in the 19th century. And you all are probably familiar with this. There were the so-called good Zionists, the ones who wanted to lift up Jewish tradition and maybe have a homeland, but a shared homeland. Well, unfortunately, these voices, the Boobers, the Arendts, the Ahadams, were very much overshadowed by people like David Ben-Gurion and Weizmann and, Golda Meir. Those who came to dominate were those who represented ethno-nationalism, settler colonialism, white supremacy, who were convinced of their technological and civilizational superiority over the indigenous people of the land of Palestine. And if for me, it was a very personal thing. I started researching this more deeply when I was preparing for a workshop teaching Palestine at the World Congress of Middle East Studies in Seville in 2017, that was. I researched it. I drew on the work of amazing Ilan Pape, Shlomo Sand, Edward Said, Nora Erkat, Rashid Khalidi, and my dear friend Nazra Shalhub Kevorkian in Jerusalem, a great feminist scholar. I learned so much, and to me it became undeniable that if you go back way before the Holocaust, way early on in the 20th century, but certainly if you look at sources in the 1940s, before the Holocaust in the 1930s, these attitudes of superiority and claims to the land based on what Nader Shahub Kevorkian calls security theology, this idea that the Bible says the God gave this land to the Jews. This was, you know, a kind of promise by God to the Israelites in the Old Testament. This becomes used politically to justify the annexation, the confiscation, the displacement of hundreds of thousands of indigenous Palestinians who are living with those displacements and their continuation in the ongoing Nakba today. It became really personal for me when I discovered some sources I just went home to my hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I did some research in the archives of our temple. We were very active. I can say more about that later. And I learned that in the 1930s, the rabbis in Tulsa were spouting the ideology, the Zionist ideology that had been brought to them, you know, by Zionists working around the country and really promoting a certain perspective. It was shocking to see. And it also was personal in terms of understanding as a feminist that this Zionist movement from the Herzl on, but certainly throughout all the decades, was the deeply militarist, masculinist movement. It was a movement of patriarchs, an elite Jewish Ashkenazi patriarchate, whose goals were explicitly population removal, displacement, and taking over Palestine, basically. So that's history. Then power. Well, we in this project have some mantras. We have some principles that we adhere to in the making of the book, in our politics. And one is that this project, this book, is not about dialogue or finding common ground. Rather, it's about the real power relations and differences, geopolitically and interpersonally. There are differences. I mean, just as an example, our contributors all have experienced the power of Zionism in very negative ways. But let me just take, for example, queer Jews and queer Palestinians. For queer Jews, there are commonalities with queer Palestinians in terms of pushback from their families and feeling like not belonging necessarily in their communities. And I really, really refer you to the great work of Al-Cause, the organization in Palestine for LGBTQ Palestinians. But for Jewish queers, it's, you know, that causes a lot of suffering. But for Palestinian queers, that struggle with families and community maybe is overlain hugely by the struggle with the boot of Israeli aggression and displacement that weighs so much more heavily. So these are very big differences. We don't want to claim common ground. We want to see differences and how we can speak to each other across the differences. We never talk about conflict. This idea of conflict, the conflict implies two equal sides, but that's not true. The Israeli power, their military power, is overwhelming compared to that of Palestinians. And that's why, and it's based on a history of settler colonialism. That's why the Amnesty International report on Israeli apartheid, which is important and should be read and should be, you know, prominent in policies in the UK and the US and Europe, everywhere. It's good, it's important, but it's insufficient because the Amnesty report ignores settler colonialism. It acts as if, you know, this apartheid regime is the only thing. Then there's this question of singling out Israel. We were accused of singling out Israel. And we say, no, we do not single out Israel. On the contrary, what we do, and I write about this in the history section of the book, we are trying to show that Israel is not exceptional, that it is absolutely a settler colonial, ethnocentric, racist regime. And it's not exceptional, but we as Jews have a particular responsibility to struggle against it because it's being done in our name. And there's nothing safe for Jews with a Jewish state. An exclusionary, militaristic Jewish state does not keep Jews safe. It only adds to our insecurity because it's rooted in hatred and masculinist militarism. And then I'll just say a word about resistance. Well, Jewish resistance to Zionism goes way back to the 19th century. And in the book, we're so proud of the historical timeline created by our dear colleague, Jay Saper, about Jewish resistance to Zionism going back like 150 years almost. And we identify with that tradition as co-editors. But Palestinian resistance is in another plane altogether. It is always a matter of life and death, and at best living on the edge. And if it were not for the extraordinary examples of Palestinian resistance from the 1936 strikes to the Nakba, to the Land Day protests in 1976, yesterday was Land Day that we celebrated that resistance, the two intifadas, the Unity Intifada of 2021, and of course, the Great March of Return 4 years ago. Its anniversary was yesterday as well. If it were not for all that, this book wouldn't exist. So we stand on a lot of courageous shoulders. And finally, relationships. Our biggest lesson in doing this work is that the most important thing, it's like Esther said in the trailer. She said, polemics can only go so far. Political positions can only go so far. It's the lived experience and the personal relationships that we share with each other that make a vibrant political movement. Esther, Sarah, and I as co-editors have formed such a loving relationship. It's been a dream. But not only with each other, but with our many contributors, and particularly our fantastic Palestinian contributors. And among them, none is more precious and eloquent than Mohammed Rafiq Mahalish. Mohammed is, I'm just gonna introduce him to you. Mohammed is a brilliant young voice of Palestinian resistance from Gaza, whom I was blessed to meet on a very amazing virtual tour of Gaza City that was sponsored by Eyewitness Palestine. Eyewitness Palestine sponsored the two delegations I went on to Palestine in 2017 and 2019. And so when they did a virtual tour of Gaza, I jumped at the chance because I thought, well, I may never make it to Gaza. And who was the guide of our tour? It was Mohammed. And Mohammed was just incredible. And the reason it was so special, Mohammed's optimism showed us a side, his Gaza City, that was full of life, color, vibrance, amazing foods, children playing, elderly people, the culture of the city, not the bombed out, victimized images we're used to. And that was so inspiring. And so I made contact with Mohammed through Eyewitness Palestine, and I wanted to see if he could write a story for our book, which was in process. And he agreed to do it. And I didn't realize at the time, he is such a really gifted writer, journalist, editor, communicator in English as well as Arabic. He's written many articles that have been published on platforms in English. on platforms in like Mondoweiss and Electronic Intifada, and of course his beautiful story, My Only Weapon is My Pencil, that's in our book, and you must read it. And he also was part of one We Are Not Numbers in Gaza, and did a lot of mentoring and editing for them, and editing of other people's work. He's the recipient of a BA in English Literature and Creative Writing from Gaza's Islamic University, but formal training is the least of it. It is really Mohammed's voice as a writer, which is full of passion, boldness in the face of hard truths, and his deep love for Palestine and his people that makes his voice so unique. And it is my pleasure, honor, and pride to introduce you to my dear friend, Mohammed Rafiq Mahawish.
Hello, everybody. Hello, dear friends and Jewish Network for Palestine. Hello, my dear friend Rosalind, my sincere mentor, friend, and colleague over the past, months through the journey of producing this book and through the journey of other publications and writing. You've been such an incredible activist. Well, activist might not give you the right description, but you were also a guide for how to fine-tune also the narratives and not only the United States, but also how the world should hear the Palestinian voices and stories, which how we got to make this book shine and how we are trying our best, to promote as wide as possible. It's me, Mohammed Rafiq Mahawish, and I am a Gaza-based journalist and writer. And it's an honor. It's my great pleasure to speak with you here today, guys. And it's really my respect is for all of you for allowing me to speak my opinions, my thought, my background, my introduction, and a little bit of how we are currently living in the Gaza Strip, as well as, in further Palestine. But before I get to anything, please excuse my, my sitting in here. It's a little bit dark, but electricity has been out for almost 20 hours now, which I'm trying my best to brighten a little up the screen and, the flashes over here. Well, as for me, as Muhammad in Gaza, we have a lexicon unknown to other people: blockade, isolation, apartheid, bombings, and systematic degradation, destruction, and decay. I mean, living under a military occupation, we wake up every day faced with worse versions of the same challenges, dreaming of going back home. I'm from Jaffa, for example, dreaming of having a life and dreaming of having basic human rights. I was born under the smoky smell of gunshots and the crying children in Gaza, under a sky once famous for its biblical stars, now, from one time to time lit up with drones and war jets. The routine of sleepless nights and the tragedy of war have imposed themselves as our lifelong companions, if I might say. My memories of normal school days are blurry, but the fear I felt running from my primary school to escape the violent assaults on my city, as also my legs ran directionless from the missiles falling from the sky, all remain vivid. I have spent 23 years of my life in Gaza, miraculously, surviving 4 of military attacks on my home. And through this, I have managed to find love and marry and curve out my family. But these years have also, it's also to note that these years have burdened me with loss of many loved ones and close friends. I have always found myself constantly trying to reconcile the many ways heartbreak can manifest itself. Personally speaking, I have lost 2 aunts, an uncle, and all of them one by one to disease. They could have been afforded more time, but being from Gaza, they could not exit this land and access the needed medications and treatment. Whether there are medicines available depends on the amount of aid the Israeli state permits into Gaza. When the medicines are there, you must pay for it, although Israel's get it for free. You can also be denied medicine if you do not have ID because you are not an Israeli citizen. So if you don't speak Hebrew, you don't have the Israeli citizen, you're denied most of the human privileges any human being around the world can have for granted since birth. 2 million of us in Gaza are trapped by an apartheid wall to the east and a polluted sea to the west, which is a depiction of how this period of land is located. Israel does not allow us to leave, so we are confined to the routine of the occupation. We are permitted electricity and water for 6 hours a day. At different times, it's really necessary to shed light on this. On different times of the day, without water, there is no food, no showers, and no baths for the babies and children. When we do have water, we must wash in the dark. Often when I'm writing, the electricity is cut off. My ideas, my words, and my ability to express myself would be lost until the next day, until tomorrow. So the frustration is suffocating, and the basic privileges of life that are enjoyed are taken from us in Gaza. So it's also another example of how it really is like in here. My wife has graduated from college, studying a major in English literature, and she has also a diploma in teaching methodology. But despite her 2 college certificates, she could not get a job. So there is no marketplace, the private sector is volatile, and the government sector is debilitating. 1 month I have an income because I get published, and another month I do not get published, and I have no income. So we go without basic foods and medicines for until I get another idea and until I get another publication. To get a little bit deeper, the odds of waking up are a shrinking probability, but we still get up for the day because for all of the hardship and the tragic loss, there is also beauty. And for that, we have so much to celebrate. I mean, our green land of olives is the root to which we attach our souls, not only bodies. Our shelter, our worth, and our affiliation with the land is symbolized by the olive tree as it sheds hope under the shadow of the occupation. Last but not least, I would say I am a husband, I am a father, and I am a son also of this land. And I find pride in our hardship because it is, guys, it's a testament to our people to be of a land that pursues not power or wealth, or the superiority, but freedom. So I would say it on one word, but freedom. It is not the duration of our struggle that is the challenge, but it's how we navigate and how we afford the capacity to navigate our lives when we are only guided by dreams. So this is who I am. This is how we, closely how we, because I would never be able to describe how it really exactly is in here. Also, my journey with a land, with a people, has been no less than incredible. And one of the foremost reasons I participated and decided to take part in this project is not because I am a writer and I have something to write about and I have an idea just to mention and that's it, but also to clearly to emphasize that we Palestinians, for over 7 decades of our struggle, we never based our struggle on a course of culture or race or religion or heritage or language, but for the mere basic human rights we have been denied for almost 70 years now. If we Palestinians ever had any problem with the Jewish people because they are Jewish, I would never contributed to the book and I would never be here. So it is not a matter of who we are, it's a matter of what we want. And it's not a matter of a difference in religion and a difference in language or a difference on culture, but it's a matter of calling on to get our humanity back. We have no problem with other people living in peace on the other side of the problem, being denied the value of humanity. So Palestinians are no less than human beings everywhere in the world. I entitled this was by the amazing consult with my friends Rosalind, Sarah Sills, and Esther, that my story should be entitled "My Only Weapon is My Pencil." And this is true. This could not be less true. Beyond being a means to making an income, writing for us is survival. And I want to stress the fact. And we are also targeted because we attempt to survive. So our authentic digital message of struggle through the virtual spaces we have, or at least are given for correct, is tamed when social media platforms, when media unjustly suppress our voices and systematically reduce our digital ability to be heard and understood. So we always try to tell we don't resist Israel for the sake of bloodshed or hatred. But we garner the world's attention and express our rights of freedom to freedom of expression and movement, equality, justice, opportunities to support our families, and the chance to travel. But more importantly, we underneath this attention, we hide too much fear and risk. Yes, exposing the occupation crimes against us jeopardizes our lives, but we keep on persisting because our safety and lives are already at risk. This attention is not yet enough, because once the news item is over, once the article is read, once the attack is over, media puts the light away, and the daily structural violence and oppression that we face every day are back into action. But we also write, and that's how I, tried through my story in the book to deliver, that we live under a system that interjects its rule into the little aspects of our daily lives and aims at our dispossession so that another population can take over. For example, this system controls our water resources, so we subsequently think of just washing our faces and taking showers and having even access to clean drinking water, to the point that we start consider leaving. For example, in the West Bank and Jerusalem, we tangle our daily routines to correspond with the Israeli military rule and timing. But the abuse and the humiliation we go through on these checkpoints are enough to make us leave. It's also, there is no easy way to this, but erasing us from virtual spaces and silencing our voices with the acquiescence of, giant technology, let's say, companies and media, are really close and are the same systematic practices we challenge in real life. For example, Free Palestine, documenting discrimination and apartheid in the West Bank, calling for an end to settler colonialism and ethnic cleansing in Sheikh Jarrah, are all valued incitement in the view of Israel. So the word resist in media terrifies this state. That's how writing is the only space that is, allowed for us, or it's not even allowed. If Israel have, has the capacity to deny this, right, it would long time ago done it. So this is, I would not go for on and on. I would, only give you a spotlight on how, it all gathered to combine more perseverance to write the story with a lot of people, and also to be part of their promotional team at the GVP New York, incredible team over there. And we helped each other a lot during this during this time. We have always been together. We have our, common grounds that tell us Palestine is not only a home, it's the yearning to go beyond that. And what we are doing today is that we hoping we write and we do the same thing, yet post-liberation. Dear friends, if I can hand over the mic for my friends in GNP, yeah, it would be okay. And if you have any questions, it would be also okay.
Thank you very, very much, Mohammed, for a very moving and revealing talk. I'm sure all our members are aware of what is happening in Gaza, but to hear and see you is a real gift for us. And we hope that we can continue doing that. When we started connecting before we allowed people into the room, there was no electricity at all, when we could hardly see Mohammed, and we wondered if if he will be able to join us. And thankfully, he was able to join us, though he had to switch the camera off so that the sound remained clear enough. Rosalind, I think we are waiting for you to address us on the process of the book.
Oh, well, I did that already. I think that first of all, I want to say, Mohammed, I'm so moved by every single thing you said. I feel so lucky to be able to work with you, and so lucky to have been able to travel to Palestine with a real social justice travel group, Eyewitness Palestine. It was, sorry, amazing. And, you know, Mohammed didn't say anything about this. He's such an important part of our book and the whole project, because the project is more than a book. The project is becoming one of actually of outreach. It's become a kind of base for building the movement. It's reaching out. It's talking to people like this, like we're doing here, in webinars, on podcasts, on a TV show. We're trying to build a movement to support our friends in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Israel 48 Palestinians, who are also many of them displaced and suffer constant discrimination in a two-tier system of law and, you know, well, apartheid. It's apartheid. And our Palestinian friends and colleagues and teachers across the globe in the Palestinian diaspora, many of them in exile, not voluntarily, having their families having escaped during the Nakba. I have to say, to me, it's been a lifelong gift of being able to be connected to Palestinian friends and loved ones. I grew up in a liberal Jewish Ashkenazi household in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was a weird place, Tulsa, Oklahoma. I never felt exactly at home there. I see my brother here in this group and a number of my friends who know this story. But anyway, our parents and grandparents were what we call Reform Jews. They were liberal. They considered themselves liberal, anti-racist, but they were also devoted to their Jewish community in the temple. It was called, ironically, Temple Israel, that we belonged to. And I was the dutiful daughter, and I went to the B'nai B'rith youth organization meetings and so on. And then they had a trip to Israel. And I was 16 years old, and I wanted to go. So I begged my parents, and I got to go. I don't think it was free in those days. It's like much like Birthright today, which is paid for by wealthy Jews, but I think my parents paid for it. I'm not sure. But anyway, I went on this trip in 1959. And this was a time, if, you know, historical context matters a lot. This was a moment, it was really the early civil rights movement in America. And I became part of that. I was very influenced by the Black civil rights movement in America. So I went on this trip, and what happened there was extraordinary. I was very open and very wide-eyed, wanting to learn about Israel and feeling like it was this place of democracy and justice and brotherhood, we called it. But what I witnessed was racism. We didn't even have that word in our vocabulary then. But I witnessed we were on this kibbutz and we were sitting around a swimming pool, and I started talking to an African guy. He was Jewish. He was probably a Yemeni, or he was from North Africa. We were just talking, and a woman comes up to me in a very distinct Brooklyn accent, says, "Don't talk to him." I said, "Why? What do you mean?" She said, "He's African." And I thought, what? What is she talking about? Well, we never got to meet any Palestinians. We were shielded from them, in this trip. But I came back with a lot of confusion and some anger. And I told this story to members of our community, this rabbi from the more Orthodox or conservative congregation, and our grandparents and some elderly people. And I just told what happened. And I got a letter in the mail that was a copy of the letter that rabbi had sent to one of the women who was upset by what I said. And he was basically saying, don't listen to her. Don't listen to her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's just a young girl. And I was furious. And that really started a lifetime of political activism. It certainly ignited my feminism to be treated as a heretic in my community and a know-nothing girl. And it also welded me deeply to the Palestinian cause I would relate to and identify with later. My mentor in college was a great, great Palestinian scholar and activist named Ibrahim Abulagud. Some of you may have heard of him. He was my dear beloved mentor. I later had these students who were incredible. One of the contributors to our book, Riham Barghouti, who was related to Omar Barghouti and who was really responsible for the origins of BDS. Riham was my student. Rabab Abdul Hadi, the great scholar and teacher, Palestinian at San Francisco State University, was my student and has been my dear friend for all these decades. I later, on my trips to Palestine in 2017 and 2019, I met other people through international feminist movements. I met Nadra Shahub Gavorkian, dear friend in East Jerusalem, and her husband Gabi, who live in the Armenian section. I went on the trip, I can't remember which year it was, but Nadra took me around her Jerusalem to see not just checkpoints, but cameras everywhere on the roof, and the settlers everywhere. I mean, I was so agitated by how could a Palestinian woman live amidst all this hostility? And that was in the West Bank, that was in East Jerusalem, nothing like Gaza, but the surveillance and the constant harassment. And it was sexual as well, and gender-based as well as ethnic. It was atrocious to witness, and especially in the company of my dear friends, to understand that my friend Nadra experienced this every single day of her life. And she is a distinguished professor at Hebrew University in the belly of the beast. She continues to teach, and she teaches settlers. And they love her. And she says she loves them, and I don't understand how she can. But that, to me, this harkens back to Muhammad's words, because Muhammad spoke of such love. And it just occurred to me that a lot of Jews, Zionist Jews, and the most committed Zionist Jews, really are motivated by hatred and fear. And they let their fear become hatred. And here is the example of Muhammad, who certainly experiences fear, has much more reason to feel fear. but somehow lets it become love. And I just can't tell you how grateful I am to share this book and this learning experience and this life with Mohammed Rafiq Mohawish and my other Palestinian friends. Thanks so much, Chaim and David, for making this opportunity for us to speak to everyone.
Thank you very, very much for your moving address. I have to say that we are the lucky ones to hear you both speaking for the many that cannot speak tonight or cannot speak at all. And you're making their voice heard. And that is a great gift to give to our members, not the first one that JVP gives us. I want to say that JVP in the United States has done the impossible. They were the main organization, and remain so, that moved young Jews away from Zionism. 22% of American Jews, according to a recent survey, are against Zionism and its control of Palestine. This was impossible to even think about 10 or 15 years ago. The main organization responsible for this shift that continues, this is a dynamic that goes one way and not the other. It goes away from Zionism, it goes away from the blind support and critical support of Israeli war crimes. JVP is responsible for it, and we're proud to be the young member of this relationship. I want to prepare for the Q&A. I'm sure you're all wishing to ask questions, so please present your question in the chat and raise an electronic hand if you can. And I want to start the question session by asking you one important question, which I think we should be relating to. For the past 5 weeks or so, the whole world has seen what is happening in Ukraine. There is much suffering, no doubt. Even the Russians are suffering in Ukraine on all sides, but definitely the Ukrainians are suffering. This was not a simple matter, but what is really very important in our connection is that I want to remind you, we're in Britain and the BBC is commemorating its 100th birthday this month. It's a century since the BBC has started broadcasting. I would like to make the case that in 100 years, the BBC has covered Palestine less than it covered Ukraine in the last 5 weeks. I'm sure this can be proven, and I intend to try and do that. But I have no doubt that this is correct. We have more or less a 24-hour rolling coverage of what has happened. And we never had anything like this, anything remotely like this about Palestine. I wonder if you, Rosalind, and you, Mohammed, have something to say about this.
Well, I first want to recall that, I'm sorry to say, the British have had responsibility ever since Mandate Palestine, but the Balfour Declaration. The British have fomented this division and hostility and supported Jewish settler colonialism in Palestine from the start. The British played a huge role. They have a big responsibility. And I think that that has to be recalled every time we think about what the Nakba was, is continuing to be the role of the British government. I also want to invite Mohammed because he has written so beautifully about the disparities, the hypocrisy of how Ukrainian refugees are being treated relative to many others, not just Palestinians, Afghans, Yemenis, all from Africa. All the people of color are not welcome the way Ukrainian, white, Christian, blonde refugees. And we feel for them. They're going through hell. But Mohammed, would you speak? You wrote such a gorgeous piece about this hypocrisy. Can we invite you to please say something about it?
Yes, of course. Thank you for mentioning that, Rosalind. This was the main theme I wanted to deliver through my article on Al Jazeera English. In this past week, we Palestinians have been shocked time and again, realizing that the global community has been gaslighting us for years. We learned that despite what we have been experiencing in our land, that international law still does exist and indeed functions. People do have the capacity and the will to take action when a people invade the land of another. We learned also that sanctions can be used swiftly and efficiently against aggressors, and that sanctioning a country for its international law violations is not necessarily a racist action. We have been fighting the military and the settler colonialism and the invasion of indigenous Palestinian land and people for 7 decades, and we always get branded terrorists. Ukrainians have done the same, and they get applauded for their bravery and heroism. And we also learned that civilian casualties are not just numbers, but actual living, breathing people who genuinely matter. And we also learned from politicians, pundits, and analysts, and even our very own oppressors and occupiers, that armed resistance to occupation is not, terrorism, but a valid, a legit right. So indeed, we have also seen stories of heroism and resistance, stories about soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, blowing up bridges to delay the approach of Russian tanks and sacrificing themselves in the process. Civilians attacking armed vehicles with whatever they have at hand. Common people receiving weapons, training, and digging trenches. If any of these stories took place in Palestine, I'm sure, rather than Ukraine, of course, they would, of course, not be perceived as acts of heroism. They would be classified and condemned as, terror. So we know all these realizations were not unique to us Palestinians. I'm sure, as you have mentioned, many Afghans, Yemenis, Ethiopians, Iraqis, Syrians, Libyans, Somalis, Kashmiris, and others who have been at the receiving end of colonial and imperial violence and oppression have, come to similar realizations as they watched the crisis of Ukraine unfold. Palestinians still support. It's not only to condemn other people's right of defense. Palestinians still support all other oppressed people's struggles for liberation. We uplift them in solidarity because we have been through the same. We support Ukrainians in their fight against the aggressors, trying to steal their lands and their futures too, because we have been there ourselves. But what I wanted to emphasize is that witnessing the same media organizations and politicians demonizing Palestinian resistance as terror publicly admit that defending your homeland and your people is actually a good, noble thing. It leads us to understand that everything is just a matter of perspective. We understand that how your actions are seen is dependent only on the identity of the aggressor you're fighting. And we don't think this is okay, but we accept it as what it is, perhaps because as our, as our friend, let's say, said, maybe because we're too relatively civilized, you know. Sorry to messing that up, but it's what's happening.
Mohammed, while you're speaking, I have a question for you. We are all very proud of the book, and I'm sure you are. How did it feel to hold the book for the first time in your hand?
Well, this is very painful question. You might not know this because it never did, because the book never made it here. Can you believe it? The book never made it here. So I still, like, the book has been out for several months now. We are promoting the book. I'm promoting the book, and I'm doing launching campaigns, and I never had my hands on it. You know, it's, you know, seized across the separation fence. I was, you know, let's say, threatened, supervised. It was, you know, traced for the book because, you know, it's touching on things that are not be comfortable for other people to, you know. So until now, I am denied to have my own copy of the book. My friends have been doing their very bestest in the GVP in, you know, delivering the book to Gaza, but it's not, you know, a matter that we can control. It's arrived in outside Gaza, and it's not allowed to enter because maybe because I don't hold an Israeli citizen, as you have mentioned. You know, like, I'm at the end of the day, I'm a Palestinian speaking on different opinions and viewpoints. That's my fault, probably.
So the Israelis are boycotting the book from the author of a part of the book. This is very interesting. Now, people who are asking questions, please show your electronic hand so I can call you to ask the questions. I want to direct just one last question to both of you, Mohammed and Rosalind. Within minutes of the start of the war in Ukraine, we heard about boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And indeed, for the first time in many decades, the Americans and the British persuaded the rest of the world to operate BDS against Russia. Israel has never suffered BDS. We are all trying to promote it, but Israel has never suffered BDS. Could you say a few words about this?
Well, it is one of the most glaring examples of the hypocrisy that we're living with. It's as if the American and the Israeli officials are just blind, deaf, and dumb. I don't understand. They're not that stupid, but boycott, divestment, and sanctions has been one of the most, I think, effective and potentially powerful weapons that we have to assure eventually enough unity and consolidation and coalition around the struggle of Palestinians to make a dent and to really hurt the Israeli government in ways that they will feel. Now, I do think that some of the boycotts of certain products have been effective. They haven't brought down the Israeli state. The most important thing that we have to do, the biggest thing, is to stop US military aid to Israel. The billions of dollars, not just $4.3 billion a year, but much more. The funding of the so-called Iron Dome, the funding of the Israeli state wouldn't exist if it weren't for US funding. So historically, you know, British promotion, and for decades, US financing, government financing, and also the whole Zionist network of organizations in the US that support the Israeli state. state and its policies, the most onerous included, the most illegal included, the settler movement increasing every single day. I think we need to continue and strengthen BDS. I think we need to shout the fact that BDS seems to have legitimacy for some and against certain countries and not others, and just really emphasize the hypocrisy of that, you know, the double standard. I think we should be writing op-eds. We should be speaking in every venue we have access to, schools, you know, churches, synagogues, everywhere, to point this out. And not just on social media for sure, but as, you know, Chaim was saying, I mean, a lot of young people around the world, not just in the US, have come to really strongly oppose Israeli policies. You know, if you gave the figures for young people in the US, they're much higher than Jews in general. Okay, my generation is, they're just a handful of us who work in organizations like JVP. But I think that this point about, in other words, the Ukrainian disaster and the Russian atrocities and genocide in Ukraine open up some opportunities for us. I don't mean to say that they're not horrible and that we don't deplore them in every way and want them to stop. But I do want to say they open opportunities for conversations, for public education, and we should use this moment. We should use this opportunity to speak about the incredible difference, sorry, the incredible double standard and, you know, hypocrisy of what's going on, who gets attacked for, you know, their, as Mohammed was saying, nobly rising up to defend their country, and who gets applauded for making Molotov cocktails, and who gets called terrorists for doing the same thing, even throwing rocks. So yeah, this is a moment where we should really be speaking out, not letting the Ukraine-Russia situation, you know, obscure, cloud over what's going on in Palestine, but on the contrary, speaking out loud about these differences.
Not only do people get blamed for defending their country and people, they are also blamed for writing the truth, like the case of this group we're talking about, of Rosalind and Mohammed and the many people who worked with them to tell us and everyone else what they know. And an example is that Mohammed can't even get the book. Now, Mohammed just wrote to me that after 20 hours of no electricity, his laptop has stopped working, the battery is finished, and his phone is running down. Are you still connected, Mohammed? And would you like to say a word about BDS?
Yes, dear Chaim, I'm here. Thank you for noting this. I'm actually really sad, and it breaks my heart to leave you guys. But I just wrote to you. I don't you guys feel that I left you in a very rude, inappropriate way. But it's not my fault. I've been saving up my batteries for almost 20 hours now, but I couldn't do any further. My battery is dead for the laptop, and my phone is about to die too. So I'm feeling kind of, you know, even, you know, deprived in that indirect way of keeping my attendance in here. So I might be any minute cutting off. It's not me, it's the phone itself. So please pardon my my departure any minute that could happen.
We love you so much, Mohammed, and your grace and dignity and calm in the face of these atrocities is just something we all need to learn from, actually. You're just incredible. Stay strong. Know that we're with you. We do everything we can.
I want to let people ask questions while Mohammed's battery is still holding. So Ron Mendel, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
I think I'm going to start by saying how moved I've been by both Rosalind's and Mohammed's comments. It just whetted my appetite to get the book. I've been trying to secure the book without any success so far. That's in England. My question, I think, is probably meant more for Rosalind. I might as well just read the question from the chat. I said, many Jews who have rejected Zionism have reasserted the ethical and moral principles of Judaism, and in the process have sought, quote, to reclaim, unquote, Judaism from Zionism. Rosalind, would you care to comment on this point?
I had to unmute. Yes, I see this so strongly among our younger members of JVP in JVP New York. They are very devout Jews, much more than us old people. We tend to be secular leftists and not have much use for religion in any which way. We turned our backs on it and, felt that, we didn't want anything to do with it because it was so imbricated in Zionism. But now young people are showing us they're performing rituals. They're combining, they're integrating their anti-Zionism with their belief in social justice and their belief that Jewish ethics are really about social justice. That's what we learned, and that they're claiming their Jewish tradition. They're observing. We have, Passover, Seder together. We have Hanukkah. We bring latkes to our Hanukkah parties. We belong to a very anti-Zionist progressive synagogue in Brooklyn called oh my God. Cholot Chayenu. And we're proud of this. I'm just coming into it slowly because it was so many years that I turned my back on observance. But I think it's very, very important. And we also have rabbis around the US. I don't know about in the UK, but we have this young generation of rabbis who are much more open to listening and to rethinking Zionism. And we've even, in our project, in A Land with the People, we've made contact with a couple of synagogues, and big ones too, who are interested in having conversations called Questioning Zionism. So something's happening, and I think we should be optimistic about it.
I'm told by many people on the chat that it's very difficult or impossible to get the book in London. I've bought it, so I think it's possible to do so, but I've noted when I ordered it, there were only 5 left. Now, this is actually good news that the book is doing so well. I'm also told that there is a way to order it, and the book can be ordered in London through Don't Books on Cheapside, and maybe other Don't outlets. I will share this on the chat in a minute so you can see the details. Les Levidow, you want to ask a questions, but I can't see you. Can you connect your camera and ask the question?
Yes, I'll just ask the question of Rosalind, because I was curious when you said that Jewish identification with Israel or support for Israel is based on fear, which is turned into hatred of Palestinians. I think that's what you meant. But then the question arises, where does the fear come from? And as well as why is that fear projected onto Palestinians as the supposed threat to Jews, thereby inverting the reality? And there are many possible answers, but for a strategy to counter that identification with Israel, we need to understand the possible answers. For example, I mean, Joe Covell, the pro-Palestinian psychoanalyst, conjectured that many secular Jews, especially, don't know who they are and feel anxious about their detachment from the Jewish religion. And that's a source of anxiety, which is then projected onto various threats, including the Palestine liberation movement. There could be other reasons. Of course, fear of anti-Semitic attack could be among those reasons, but that doesn't seem so compelling. So what's your view? And what does that mean for a strategy to counter the identification?
Well, first of all, let's face the fact that anti-Semitism is a real thing, historically and in the moment. And I think a lot of the claims that anti-Semitism is on the increase and that some of it is exaggerated. If you compare anti-Semitism to Islamophobia, anti-Islam in the United States, they really, I mean, they aren't comparable. But, and particularly in terms of police behavior and police surveillance. So I think that there are historical reasons for fear, but the fear gets displaced onto a whole people who, as Esther often says, her parents said, they had nothing to do with the Holocaust, the Palestinians. And so, you know, that displacement, there's a kind of pathology in it, actually. And I don't claim to fully understand it. You know, I knew Joel Covell, and I think his work was interesting, but in this moment, this idea that if you don't support the claims of the right to an exclusionary Jewish state, you are a traitor. And Jews who have been in opposition to Zionism have been called every kind of thing: self-hating, traitors, you know, all kinds of things. And they've also, I mean, from academia, I have friends who have never been able to achieve any kind of status in the academy, or who have lost their jobs, have been fired because of taking this position. Not just many Palestinians, of course, but also Jews. And I don't understand the fear myself. I don't experience it personally. Of course, I live in New York City, which is a very Jewish city. I walk around the streets. One time in my entire life, which was about a month ago, I was walking down the street right in my neighborhood, and a little old lady walking down the street, and a guy, a youngish, tall, white guy, turned around and called me an ugly fucking Jew. And I wanted to say, well, you know, maybe I'm ugly, but I'm not fucking all that much. But I am Jewish. And I'm also a trained kickboxer. I'm going to kick your ass right now. But I didn't say that. And I didn't chase him down the street. But it was something. I mean, it was really something. And so that stuff exists. But that does not threaten my livelihood. That does not threaten where I live. That does not, you know, risk that I'm going to be displaced from my home. It does not deny the fact that most of the Jewish people where I live are quite well off and quite secure. And they don't have to fear the police. When I see a policeman, I don't shudder, as my partner, who is African American and grew up in Harlem. He might, given his treatment by police, or his son might. So I don't understand this Jewish fear. I see it as pathological and very destructive, because it you know, really deprives people of connection and relationships that might enrich their lives. It shuts them up and closes them off And I find that really sad.
I think Mohammed is unable to relate to this question, even if he wanted to, because his battery has died and he's not connected to us anymore, unfortunately. Also, this is a great pity because I'm getting many, many messages of admiration and support for you, Mohammed, and you can't even hear it. This is the situation we are in. I think I will pass those to you by email, but I hope you'll get that email. So we are talking about people who for 20 years have suffered much more than Ukraine has suffered this month, but hardly anybody in the world is speaking on Palestine right now. They are speaking about the dead people in Israel. The Israeli dead are always spoken about on the media. The Palestinian dead remain silent as they were in life. I want to say that we have some 4 or 5 minutes for any question that is still remaining unasked. Are we having anyone wishing to ask a question? It seems you've answered all the questions, Rosalind. So I want to thank you again. Right, Naomi. Sorry, Naomi. Please ask your question.
I'm being asked to talk to retired trade unionists next week on the topic of anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism, or the other way around, really. And I often wonder, and I don't know if you have an answer about this on a historical level, about where did the impunity start with Zionism? Because they're the most brutal, hateful bunch of people, and have been since I can see the Zionist Association formed. They were the basis of vile terrorism, the basis of using their children to blow up what they wanted, to make attacks. So I'm just wondering, how did that happen? Because they're so powerful in terms of thwarting democracy, in terms of having planted themselves in democratic structures. I'm not going to go on anymore because I end up like a spider and it goes out in all directions and I get really frustrated. But you know, and I'm going to have real difficulty making this talk in 20 minutes.
I'm sympathetic, Naomi. Read the history section of our book. It might be helpful to you. But I really, want to emphasize the historical context in which Zionism arose.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a persecuted people. My grandparents were not in Germany. They were not victims of the Holocaust, but they were victims of Russian pogroms.
Mine too.
Yeah. So I think my grandmother was from Ukraine, from near Odessa. So that was a horrible, centuries of persecution and exclusion was a real thing and really, shaped people and shaped their fears. But the context, the historical context, is colonialism in Western Europe, igniting the aspiration, the idea that freedom and dignity resided in having your own state. And as a feminist, I see that also as a kind of patriarchal, masculinist view of we have to have our own state, our own military, in order to be regarded as real men. And I think that's true of people like David Ben-Gurion. So trying to prove their manhood and their dignity through statehood. And that's a tragedy. It's been a tragedy for all colonized peoples.
But the beginning of Zionism, was it not prompted by the elite, the Jewish elite that already had power, already had economic power, as opposed to the Bund in Europe who had compassion and egalitarianism and socialism, and you know, they won the hearts of the colonial people, you know, the colonials, didn't they?
The Bund were anti-Zionists.
Yeah.
And they stood up against Zionism. We have a little bit about that in the book and in the timeline. You know, there were many Jews who were against Zionism. The ones who grabbed hold of it as an opportunity. I think you're right, Naomi. I mean, I think they were mainly from the elite. I mean, Theodor Herzl was definitely from the elite. He was identified with the aristocracy, you know, in Prussia. The leaders, the ones, you know, you have documents in British archives that I have seen that show a meeting of what I call the Ashkenazi Jewish Patriarchate, of people like David Ben Gurion and Chaim Weizmann and the, you know, what's the department store, you know, the guy who started the famous department store, the Jewish guy. Anyway, they all meeting to plan how they're gonna.
Harrods?
Pardon?
Was it Harrods?
Yeah, no, it was no, never mind. Excuse my old brain. But how they were going to create Eretz Yisrael in Palestine, and that would involve what came to be known as population removal. And they didn't say we're going to kill them all, but they did say we're going to bring more Jews in and take Arabs out. And it was all a plan, and it became Plan Dalet, Plan D. So it was very deliberate, and certainly those who engineered it were male elites of Jewish, you know, Western European Ashkenazi origin.
Can I just mention two things related to Rosalind's answer? One of them is the fact that until 1939, no country could present more than 1% of its Jewish population supporting Zionism.
Ah, wow.
This is an incredible number. The other number is also interesting. The Bund, the Socialist Party of Jews in Russia and Poland, was the second largest party in the Sejm, in the Polish parliament. It had tens of members of parliament representing socialist Jews that were in total opposition to Zionism. So these are the numbers we're speaking. People in Eastern Europe supported socialism, and Jews supported socialism. And supporting socialism in Poland meant opposition to Zionism and a total refusal to join it. I think that's very important. John Hall, also relating to this question, not directly, but I think is reminding us that most Zionists are not Jewish.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Most Zionists live in the United States, and 50 million of them or so are Christian.
Evangelical Christians.
Today, we even have Muslim Zionists. I mean, not in numbers such as these, but you know, Zionism is actually recruiting Muslim Zionism now in the Gulf and such places. So actually, not all Zionists are Jews, and not all Jews are Zionists, and we should never tire of reminding people of that.
But the Christian Zionists were formed before the Ashkenazi Zionists.
That's true. That's true. Christian Zionism grew up from England, actually, and was a very strong movement in the British elite and British colonial elite. So these are historical facts. They cannot be forgotten and should not be forgotten.
And that idea of a land without a land without a people for a people without a land comes from a Protestant clergyman in in Britain. I want to say too that without the support of European governments, you know, there wouldn't have been a Zionism, there wouldn't have been a Jewish state. Hannah Arendt warned about this. She said, you'll fall down if you keep, you know, you keep this support, you're so dependent on them. But that was a reality, and it's still true with the US and Europe. Really.
Well, I think we should all thank you and our brothers and sisters in JVP for starting to turn the tide against the lies and actions of Zionism and being so successful, and we hope to follow. But you mentioned that you have a rabbinical council connected to JVP with many young rabbis. We cannot yet count this achievement as one of ours. Unfortunately, in Britain, the society is much more regressive and I think conservative, deeply conservative. The whole society is deeply conservative, even a lot of the left. And therefore, it was easy to persuade most of the people in the Labour Party that BDS for Palestine is wrong, while they accept that BDS for Ukraine is right. So and it's interesting, Naomi, that you're going to talk to trade unionists and you might find the same problem with them. I hope not. I don't know which union it is. I hope that you will be successful in persuading them.
Well, one problem we've had in Glasgow is that every year for the last 7 or 8 years, there's been an anti-racist march. And the reason I started a group with other women for Scottish Jews Against Zionism was that the Israeli flag was being flown on this anti-racist march. And it's just so distasteful and dishonest that a socialist march would accept the Israeli flag. Not one Israeli flies it, but they won't accept the whole connotation, this big fear of anti-Semitism, you know, upsetting the political elite. And it's a real bone of contention now in Glasgow. So I know there's going to be retired members at that meeting that are part of that group.
Well, Naomi, listen, our heart goes out to you. We wish you very well in your talk. They are lucky to have you. You are really going to be a force.
Well, I think I'm going to show the little film that Mohammed, I can't remember his surname. There's a new film that was put out yesterday for Land Day. So it's a 10-minute, it's very short film. So I think I'm going to supplement my talk with that. And all I can say is I hope it's just the first of many talks, because it can only get better. It's terrifying.
Good luck with this. I'm sure you'll be successful. And now I want to thank all of you on such a lovely evening in London, coming to listen to us. And of course, many American friends who came to hear Roz and Mohammed as well. I want to thank both of you for giving us a real feel for what it is to be not influenced by the Zionist propaganda, but make your own decision, make your own politics, and actually come together for the end of Zionism and for decolonization of Palestine. Now, I want to also say that the next big action of JNP in London will be the launch of a new policy that we have worked on for over a year with other groups. We are a group of Jews in the main, but we worked with Muslim groups, with Christian groups on a program called Convivencia for Just Peace in Palestine. And this is a decolonizing, anti-racist coalition for peace in Palestine, which is based on the end of Zionism and a one state for all its citizens and the return of the Palestinian refugees. So this is the justice we are discussing. We will launch this program on the 8th of May in London. Please watch our website and Facebook. There will be the notices. And I want to take this opportunity to mention that our next webinar is on the 10th of April in 10 days' time. And it is the third webinar in a series on the Mizrahi in Israel, how they suffered oppression by the Zionist regime, and the connection between that racism and oppression towards them and racism and oppression towards the Palestinians. The professor from New York University and a friend, Tzvi Ben-Dor Benit, will give that will give that lecture, and you're all invited. Please check on our Facebook and you will find the invite. And actually, I can see that David has already shared the links, so you can see them in the chat. I want to thank you again. This is the end of our meeting, but it's not the end of our love to JVP, to Muhammad, and to Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.